When you read this book, it makes these people appear, I think accurately, about being just hyper productive and always on and super efficient. Dr. Covey, our co-founder, in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the 7th habit is sharpen the saw, right? About how productive, effective people still take time to relax, renew, refresh, repair. Do you find that any of these presidents were ever off and they did that? Do they have much personal time for reflection and renewal?
Well, that's what's amazing. We think of ourselves in this complicated world as not having time for reflection or renewal. They were pretty busy. They had civil wars. They had, World War II. They had depressions, and yet they all did. I mean, Abraham Lincoln actually went to the theater 100 times during the Civil War. He said when the lights went down and a Shakespeare play came on, for a few precious hours, he could forget the war that was raging. And it gave him time to think, by moving the channels of thought into another direction. Teddy Roosevelt actually exercised 2 hours every afternoon in the White House, a raucous game of tennis or a hike in the wooded cliffs of Rock Creek Park, or a boxing match or a wrestling match. And somehow that relaxation allowed him to think more clearly. FDR had a cocktail hour every night in the White House during World War II, and the rule was you couldn't talk about the war. You could talk about gossip or books you'd read. Somehow he was able to relax. And at one point he went on a 10-day fishing trip when England was in the worst moments of the early days of the war, before we were in it with Pearl Harbor. And while he was on that fishing trip, he came up with a whole Lend-Lease idea, which allowed us to lend our weapons to England and all of our allies later. It was like a brainstorm because he was away from it. Lyndon Johnson is the outlier here. He never really could relax, and I think that's what wore down his energy in the long run. I remember when I was with him at the ranch and we were in his swimming pool, I would think we're going to exercise, but instead the pool was filled with floating rafts, with floating telephones and floating notepads so that he could work at every moment. He didn't want to go to the movies because he couldn't talk in the middle of the dark. So in a certain sense, I see my other guys were able to do that. And Lincoln also had a sense of humor, and he could relax by telling funny stories. He said that it would whistle off sadness. They had extraordinarily different ways of doing it, but I think it each elongated their possibilities as a result.